Tuesday, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the so-called Taiwan Assurance Act of 2019. In response, China has lodged objections with the United States, making its opposition to its provisions clear. The act not only encourages Taiwan to increase its military spending, but also says that Washington should conduct the so-called regular sales and transfers of defense articles to Taiwan and back its participation in international organizations. So what is the Taiwan Assurance Act all about? What impact could it have on cross-strait relations, and how will it affect China's relations with the United States? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Mr. Einar Tangen, our current affairs commentator. We shall also speak via satellite to Professor Cheng Youping at Taipei University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Deng. So, gentlemen, let's start with the wording from this very Taiwan Assurance Act. At the beginning, it says it is the policy of the United States to reinforce its commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act that was enacted 40 years ago in a manner consistent with the 6 assurances and in accordance with the United States One China policy. Now, this seems a little bit self-defeating in purpose. Do you think so, Mr. Tangen?
Well, I mean, there's a distinction between policy and principle. I mean, for China, it's a principle. For the U.S., obviously, it's a policy. So this is a 40-year anniversary, and what you had was a unanimous 414-0 vote with 17 abstentions, which means that this idea of China as the bad guy for the U.S. has gone across the aisles, and it's going to be very, very difficult going forward.
Talking about this bipartisan consensus, we know the major sponsor of this act is Mr. Michael McCaul, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he has launched this 50 bills in 50 days initiative. He tried to introduce 50 forward-leaning bipartisan policy solutions to advance shared global interests and respond to today's emerging threats. Do you think more legislations like this against China will be coming out?
Yeah, I mean, this is the election season. I mean, we're heading quickly into it, and as a result of that, what you're going to have is China bashing. That has been a long staple of the American political scene, but it's going to be more intense, especially given what is happening now with the trade situation. You've already seen regular patrols of U.S. ships, warships, not only through the Taiwan Straits, but also in areas claimed by China in the South China Seas. So you have this kind of all fronts pressure that is the U.S. is trying to put on China economically, through trade, politically, through advancement of things like this, where they're directly impacting the principles that China holds dear and considers domestic, and then militarily with these kind of gunboat diplomacy threats.
And Mr. Yang, how dangerous is this kind of political maneuver in the U.S. Congress? Let's get back to the Taiwan Assurance Act. We saw the wording U.S. One China policy in it, but actually it's totally against the One China principle. Tell us the damage here.
Well, firstly, let me make a distinction between policy and ideology, legislation-based ideology. Generally, officials, president and his team has a stronger sense about policy. For example, One China policy, regardless if you're Republican or Democrat. As long as you are in the White House, you are in the government, you have to abide by the policy line. But
sorry, what's the red line in that U.S.
What I want to see is congressmen, people at Capitol Hill has a weaker sense about the policy. They make many legislation not based on policy line, but based on their ideology line. So many people in Capitol Hill, especially during the campaign election seasons, they often to make a political moves based on ideology rather than the national policy. So that is the background. Regarding to the latest legislation, the so-called assurances, first I want to say that is a very unique case for American legislation branch to pass several legislations on the other countries internal affairs. If you look at the record of the Capitol Hill's legislation, it's very few cases like Taiwan legislation from the previous travel to assurances. And secondly, what was the reason? I think ideology based on China is the enemy. So returning to your question, all the legislation like a Travel Act or the Assurance Act damage seriously about China's core national interest. But by the same token, the damage on China will certainly backfire on the damage on the American national interest.
Could you be a little bit more specific in this regard, the damage? What kind of damage it will cause?
Yeah, if U.S. legislation marching towards that direction, sooner or later, inevitably, China and the U.S. will certainly fall in strategic, even military confrontations. The more encouragement by U.S. for Taiwan's independence, the more dangerous for the confrontation between Beijing and Washington. So actually, people in Capitol Hill, some people in Capitol Hill are doing very dangerous things, not only from China, but also for Taiwan and for the United States. And secondly, because of the very serious damage, such a damage will spill over to the other areas like economic area, mail-to-mail exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, and so on. So such damage really produce prolonged effects for the general bilateral relation.
So how far will that particular group of the people in the United States go? Still get back to the act, it has passed the Congress, now it's going to the Senate, and then if it's passed in the Senate, then it will go to President Donald Trump and sign it into law.
Well, it's not a law, it's a non-binding resolution. So all it is really cheerleading. But I would agree with my colleague that this is a bellwether that's saying, look, we regard China as the enemy. It's the one who's attacking. And they're using Taiwan as basically as a chess piece in this kind of confrontation. And this idea that you're going to start using political proxy wars, where the U.S. will be supporting Tsai Ing-wen or her party, and China will be hoping that the KMT will take a more rational approach towards China. What's missing from this is this economic things. I mean, Taiwan, over 10% of the working population of Taiwan works in China. If you start adding up the amount of investment that Taiwan has in China, it's not a situation where you can, simply separate. Much like Donald Trump's trade war. I mean, it's not two separate countries going at it. You're involved in a global web. Any string, it's like a big ball of string with many ends. Anytime you pull one, it simply makes the ball of twine even more difficult to unravel. So in this kind of things, I would agree that it is a Pyrrhic victory if they think they're going ahead with this. They're actually leading down towards a path. The American side doesn't realize, these congressmen and senators, not some of the senators do, they're more in touch with this. Taiwan is an absolute bright red line. If it is crossed, China will act militarily. It's not will they act, it means they will. They have no choice. It's within the Constitution. So this kind of playing at this game, very dangerous.
So Taiwan is China's core interest. Why do you think at this particular timing in the history, the Trump administration keeps provoking China on this red line, as Ms. Duncan just described?
Well, I think the background is U.S. in general, the majority of the political circle has put China as the most fundamental strategic competitor. So now the most frequent keywords in Washington, D.C. is commutation against China. So in the commutation, many American politicians think they should make use of every means possible, as many means as possible to compete with China. And among all means, some politicians regard Taiwan issue is the most, is the strongest leverage on China. So that is why in recent years, especially in recent months, efforts and legislative actions on Taiwan is escalated. And I said, well, they have got Travel Act, They are going to pass the legislation about Assurance Act, and I'm sure they will do something more. That's the American side. But the other side, we should not ignore. That is Taiwan's effort. Actually, Chinese authority has been making efforts to lobby and educate American Congress people. For example, in the
so you're saying that Taiwan's lobbying power in D.C. is very strong, or at least active nowadays?
Yeah, actually stronger and stronger. I freshly remember when I was a diplomat in Washington D.C., Taiwan spent $3 million to lobby McCarthy consultant firm to push a resolution about Li Denghui's visit, and they succeeded by spending such money. And since then, they keep inputting their resources in Washington, D.C., especially K Street in Washington, D.C., say lobby. And for example, the Travel Act, some of the technical specific articles are educated by Taiwan people, not by initiated by American congressmen. For example, in the articles they said the exchanges of military to military between Taiwan and the U.S. should upgrade from colonel to general, and for civilian officials from division level to bureau level. So such a technical specifics are it's not well known by ordinary people, especially about people on the Capitol Hill. And the Taiwan people know that, and they educated the country people say, you should write this one, you should write that one. So in short, some political moves, motivations from Capitol Hill, and some education effort from Taiwan composed such a dangerous trend on the Capitol Hill.
How about we talk to a guest from Taiwan? Let's talk to Professor Cheng Youping from Taipei University. Well, Professor, what do you make of the whole dynamics in response to this upcoming Taiwan Assurance Act? It just passed the House of Representatives, and it's due for another vote in the Senate. Is there any clear mind in Taiwan saying that this is a dangerous path?
What I have to say as an objective observer, everybody knows that the Taiwan Assurance Act is nothing more than just a political gesture. It is a tool for the American administration to manipulate Taiwan as a bargaining chip or as a pawn in the game. At the same time, it is helpful for Donald Trump's bid for presidential election in the year 2020, because it goes to show that Donald Trump is very hard-lined in this aspect. However, on the side of Taiwan, in addition to Tsai Ing-wen's office expressing its gratitude and Tsai Ing-wen's firm belief that Taiwan-U.S. partnership would deepen, and also welcome this act as a positive move, most people in Taiwan, including the opposition parties, feel pretty awkward. They don't want to openly criticize America's ambition or its intention. But everybody here, especially the opposition parties, fully realize that this is not good for cross-strait relations, because this Taiwan Relations Act, because after this Taiwan Relations Act, you have this Taiwan Assurance Act, which serves no good for Taiwanese people. It does offer Tsai Ing-wen's office as some kind of a political gesture, but for most people in Taiwan, people are fed up with the lip service by the American administration. In the past, Americans have always passed some resolution, some pieces of legislation, and telling Taiwanese people that, hey, look at this, we are so nice to you, so you have to do whatever we want you to do. But in fact, this kind of lip service serves no good, especially for Taiwan's economy. So people are asking, what do we do with this? Are we going to buy more weapons? If we want to buy more weapons, that means the diversion of necessary funds from social welfare, from education, from public health. So I would have to say it's an ambivalent attitude here you can observe in Taiwan, and only perhaps the Taiwan independence people or the Tsai Ing-wen administration would welcome this Taiwan Assurance Act.
Well, Professor, you call this a U.S. political gesture, but how about we turn to something more substantial? That is the role of the AIT in Taiwan. Because do you think that particular institution will be put to the very diplomatic front of the U.S. political maneuvering at the cross-strait ties? Because let's face it, the United States has openly admitted that since 2005, it has sent in-service military personnel to that very institution.
Well, we cannot deny that there is a very slim possibility for the American administration to send paramilitary vessels to Taiwanese ports, or to send more military personnel to station in, for example, AIT's headquarters in Taipei. But that doesn't mean that the administration in Washington do not realize that there is a red line in this regard. So I would say that people in Washington, the leaders in Washington, are fully aware where that red line is, and they wouldn't cross that. But before that, they will keep pushing the envelope to try to see if Beijing will tolerate their moves. So it's going to be a kind of a maneuvering game. It's a back and forth game, but I would have to say that I would bet on Beijing showing stronger and more positive gesture, showing that the American administration do not cross the red line. Because if you push too far, you send the wrong signals. The people here in Taiwan, for those who advocate Taiwanese independence, they might take up more aggressive and bold moves. And that could turn out to be a disastrous result for both sides of the strait, and that includes the United States.
Well, Professor, we'll be getting back to you on this topic. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Stay with us. Well, Mr. Tangen, earlier you just talked about this dooming scenario of military clashes if the United States crossed the red line of China's core interest. Now, get back to the wording in this Taiwan Assurance Act. It clearly indicates that the United States should conduct the regular sales and transfers of defense articles to Taiwan in order to enhance its self-defense capabilities, particularly its efforts to develop and integrate asymmetric capabilities. Now, having said that, do you think the United States will strengthen its arms sales to Taiwan in the near future?
Well, this is the real question. In the past, the U.S. has sent a lot of arms, but they've generally been, kind of second-rate. They haven't been the top level. If they switch that, that would mean a lot of consternation coming from Beijing. I mean, there was an understanding. China does not like any arms sales to Taiwan, but if it becomes top-line military-grade hardware, then it's quite possible that China will take action.
What could be some of the signs of that shift from a second level to top level? Is it F-35 or is it Aegis level Navy missiles?
Yeah, Aegis level missiles, anti-defense missiles, top-line aircraft, the 35, any of those types of things would be a real signal. There could also be something in the Navy Department if they start putting out, allowing top-line ships to be sold directly to Taiwan. These would be missile-carrying ones, especially ones that are anti-ship and can also be mobile launchers. The ultimate test would be, what kind of situation is the U.S. contemplating as it plays out different scenarios with nuclear weapons? Would they go that far? The feeling to date is that they would not. Militarily, there is no question that China could overwhelm Taiwan. There might be some guerrilla activity within the mainland, but that would be prior to any kind of response the U.S. would have. The question is, what are they thinking at the Pentagon?
So another big question is, how will China react to that scenario of more and upgraded U.S. arms sales to Taiwan?
Well, I think China's assessment now is U.S. will not stop arms sale to Taiwan in the foreseeable future. Given the background, given the situation, China has started two categories of preparations. One preparation is military preparation. During the past few decades, U.S. has been trying to make the so-called balance of military capabilities between the two sides of Chinese. It's very bad for Taiwan, the mainland. It's bad for Chinese as a whole. However, that's the reality. So whenever U.S. want to increase Taiwan's military capabilities, China has to make more efforts to keep the advantage over Taiwan, so that we can prevent Taiwan from the independence or separation. And so that means the more arms sale to Taiwan, the more military capability build up for Beijing. We have to do that. And if you mentioned whether or not the U.S. will upgrade the arms sale from the secondary level to top level, I cannot exclude the probability. If that is the case, China will certainly input more efforts for the military build-ups. So it's a negative, dynamics among Taiwan and the mainland. And the secondary preparation is China will launch a wider range of efforts to expand the exchanges between mainland and Taiwan, from political, economic, cultural, people to people, even when the condition is secured, male to male between the two sides. So the more exchanges, the less probability of the independence. The more exchanges, the closer ties between Taiwan and the mainland, the less opportunities for external forces like U.S. to intervene. In general, such obstacles to Taiwan, such legislation from the U.S. is a very dangerous intervention to domestic affairs among Chinese. So I think the secondary preparation is more meaningful and more important to say we need to get closer so that we can reduce the room for the external interventions.
What about the so-called inclusion, Taiwan's inclusion in international organizations, as the Act put it? Because it sounds like it needs to promote Taiwan's participation in UN organizations, the World Health Assembly, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and so on. Do you think it's addressing the real question here? Because the real question is not Taiwan should participate it or not. It's if the United States and Taiwan are using the participation or inclusion in international organizations as a political tool to utilize their own purposes.
Well, I think this question you mentioned has been misled by some American politicians and by some independent forces in Taiwan. The key of the question for Taiwan's participation in organization does not lie in exclude or include, but lies in the title, the nature of the body participating in an organization. For example, the United Nations. All members of the United Nations should be sovereign state. And Beijing has always been opening the door for Taiwan's participating, as long as under the principle of one China. One China policy base, one China principle base can allow Taiwan to take part in every international organization. The other base, different from one China, will oppose by Beijing. So it's very simple. For example, if Taiwan authority, for example, the current subject situation between the mainland and Taiwan, just because of the 92 consensus. Actually, if Taiwan authorities continue, accept, and agree with the 92 consensus, many difficult issues can be solved, including the participation in organization.
But that could be the breach of lifeline for the DPP in Taiwan and Tsai Ing-wen herself, because let's remember, this is a party put Taiwan independence in its party manifesto, right?
Well, in general, let me put it this way. TPP now is a ruling party under Taiwan's constitution. But if you look at the constitution of Taiwan and the constitution of the TPP, totally different, totally confrontational. TPP's constitution, the party's constitution is independence of Taiwan. And the constitution of Taiwan is one China. Why Beijing insists on 92 consensus? Simply because, just as Dr. Kissinger pointed out many years ago, say both sides of Taiwan Strait recognize that one China in the world.
So how about we talk to Professor Cheng Youping in Taiwan for more on that? Well, Professor, how much of the dynamics do you think are having to do with the upcoming elections in Taiwan? Do you think this is the desperation of Taiwan herself to gain some momentum for her DPP?
Well, if you refer to the Taiwan Assurance Act and it's the other one, the non-binding resolution about reaffirming commitments to Taiwan, I would have to say it serves as more or less a plus to DPP and Tsai Ing-wen's coming election. Obviously, among the deep green, or what we call the Taiwan independence advocates, there was a very positive response regarding the U.S. House passing the resolution and the Taiwan Assurance Act. So it goes to serve Tsai Ing-wen only among that voting bloc, which means that it's going to give her a certain advantage points. But overall, in Taiwan, this kind of charade, this kind of a political maneuvering does not serve too much good for DPP, because in the end, people are still looking at the economic growth, they're looking at their salary, the unemployment rate.
Well, talking about that, we have to talk about the close exchanges between the mainland and Taiwan nowadays. Well, Professor, I'd like to refer you to the upcoming visit of Hong Xiu-chu, former chairperson of the KMT. She will lead a delegation to visit Beijing from May the 12th to the 15th, very soon. So what can we expect from this visit? And let's start with, will this visit actually happen? Because we know that the DPP is desperately trying to stop former KMT leaders to visit the mainland.
But for Hong Xiu-chu to lead the delegation to visit mainland China this time, I would say there is a very high probability that it's going to come true. And if that does so, and I have to say that it serves as a boost to the blue camp. In other words, for those who are willing to accept the 1992 consensus and those who are willing to see peaceful development across the Taiwan Strait, that's a positive development. And Hong Xiu-chu is a very persuasive speaker when it comes to politics. And I would guess that her visit and her delegation is going to serve some good for the cross-strait interactions. And it would also encourage the blue camp to put in more effort to unseat Tsai Ing-wen and her administration in year 2020.
Thank you very much, Professor Cheng Youping in Taipei. Also, thank you very much, our guests in the studio, Mr. Yang Qiu and Mr. Aina Tanganda. That's it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Han Deng in Beijing. Bye-bye.